One Friday after a long work week, I was sitting at the bar of my favorite establishment. I made a habit of coming here after work on Friday before I went home, because the beer was cold and the food was always great. And it wasn't because I had something urgent waiting for me at home, but because I decided to. My favorite server in the world, Gail, was standing at the bar chatting with me about nothing when she mentioned that a young couple she hadn't seen before had come in. Since the other server was occupied by another table, Gail approached the young couple who didn't seem to know where to sit. She greeted them and a brief conversation ensued that ended with Gail pointing directly at me. A young couple approached. As they approached me, I realized that they must be brother and sister, maybe even twins. For some reason they seemed vaguely familiar, but I knew I had never seen them before. "Pardon the intrusion, sir, but is your name Ames?" the young woman asked. "Yes, it is." "Why?" I replied. I had no idea who these people were or what they could possibly want from me. I wasn't unfriendly, but I wasn't completely welcoming either. "Mr. John Charles Ames, is your name Jack or sometimes JC?" She continued her interrogation. "Yes." "Since you seem to know who I am, could you tell me who I'm talking to?" I hadn't been called JC in ages. We think you're our father. We're Jessica and James," she said hesitantly and with some hope, as if their names explained everything. But it didn't. "I'm sorry. I don't know who you think I am, but I've never had children in my life." "You must be mistaken," I told her. It was a fact. I had been divorced for over 20 years and knew that my ex and I had no children. If she did have children, it wasn't with me, and I haven't had any relationship since then that would have produced 2 children the age of the couple. "Please excuse me. I have to go," I said to the young couple and then to the server. "Gail, please put this on my tab. I'll see you next Friday as usual." I got up and walked out of the pub. The young couple didn't say anything, just watched me walk away. I went home to my cabin, which was attached to a campground, part of which I owned. You could get into the cabin by getting a permit through the campground, or by knowing where to turn off the driveway. It wasn't really a cabin, I just called it that. It was a 2-story log home with 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, living room, den, kitchen, dining room. It had way more room than I needed. I got it with the campground and my partners didn't want to live in it. They had a big, spacious house about a kilometer from the campground. They needed a room because they had 5 children. The visit of the 2 young men stirred up long-buried memories that I had hoped were buried forever. I am a computer security consultant as well as an instructor at a small community college near Halifax, Nova Scotia. I have been working at the college for about 15 years now, and I also do some consulting for small and medium-sized businesses as a part-time job. Although my partner and his wife and I are equal owners of the campground, we have little or no involvement in the day-to-day operations of the campground. We have a very capable manager who runs it for us. We can help out when it's very busy, but usually we just stay out of it. 23 years ago, I was a young guy fresh out of university with a new degree in computer science. My ex-wife, Bev, had gotten her nursing degree and we were married shortly after graduation. Our life was beautiful. We were young, in love, and had the world by the ass. A couple years after we got married, we bought a small house in the West End of Vancouver, British Columbia. It was near St. Paul's Hospital, where Bev worked as an operating room nurse. The drive to my work was only 10 minutes by bus in bad weather or about 30 minutes on foot. My job was new and interesting because it was the early days of the internet. The deep and complex security requirements had not yet been announced, and we were all busy developing new programs and services. It was an exciting time to be in the industry. Our company was expanding on an almost daily basis, and I was quickly rising through the ranks, to say the least. However, I knew my job and increasingly found myself being asked to train new employees on our programs and systems. Although I had never had formal training as a teacher or trainer, I found that I enjoyed that part of the job. The only blemish on our complete happiness was the passing of our parents within a few months of each other. Mine were killed in a multi-car accident on an inland highway. I was devastated, naturally, as I had no other close family members. Bev's mother had an aggressive form of breast cancer and thankfully died rather quickly and without much agony. We always assumed that her father died of a broken heart. He was devastated by the loss of his wife of 30-plus years and was never the same after her death. He left us about 6 months after her death. Like me, Bev was an only child. The only silver lining in the whole story was that we were able to be debt-free, except for a small mortgage on the house. Truth be told, we would rather have those debts than lose our parents. I had a simply horrible week. My team called me in on Sunday for troubleshooting, and all week I worked from early morning until 10 at night. I hardly ever saw Bev during that time, at least not while she was awake. I was just too tired, and she was usually in bed by the time I got home. In the morning, I'd leave before she even woke up. I'd come home, eat something and go to bed, get up early, and it would start all over again. And so it was on that fateful Friday. We had been married for about 3 years when that world and everything I valued came to an end. I came home from work late Friday night, as I had all week, and found that Bev had moved out. Everything, and I mean everything that could be considered her property, was gone, including our car. Well, actually it belonged to her. I never took ownership and she owned it before we were married. To say I was furious was like saying the sun was red hot. It was obvious that she was planning this. I hadn't seen the slightest hint that it was going to happen. The hospital told me that she had taken a vacation and didn't know where she was. They didn't say when she would be back. I searched all of our favorite restaurants and drinking establishments, called everyone we had ever been in touch with. I waited the allotted 48 hours before filing a missing persons report with the police. They expressed no hope. The following Monday, I reluctantly returned to work. Even my assistant, Patricia, or Pat, saw that I was just doing my duties. It was hell not knowing where the love of my life was and why she was gone. In all the years we knew each other, we hardly ever fought or argued. It was a mystery I couldn't solve for years. Over the following weeks, I came to the conclusion that she had found someone else. It was heartbreaking, but if it made Bev happy, I tried to forget it and move on with my life. My attorney called me about 2 weeks later and told me he had papers for me to sign. I had no idea what was in store for me when I walked into his office and got the divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences. As instructed by her attorney, Bev's whereabouts could not be listed. Defeated, I signed the papers before leaving the attorney's office. He explained the various options to me, none of which I liked. However, I made him enclose a note asking her attorney not to ask why she left me. I never got an answer, and after a few months I was single again. After a few months of living in a fog, I sold the house. After paying off the mortgage, there was a decent amount of money left over. I put half of the proceeds into an account in Bev's name and informed my lawyer, who of course knew who Bev's lawyer was. She could access the money at any time. I still loved her, although I was devastated by her act. I didn't know for sure that there was someone new in her life, but if that was the case, it was better that I wasn't there. After selling the house, I quit my job with the vague idea that I would be traveling for a while before settling down. Was I running away? You're damn right, running, hoping for a new life without memories. It was a tearful farewell to my faithful assistant Pat. She and her husband were the only islands of sanity in my world. I honestly told her I didn't know where I was going. I made vague promises to let her know if I ever settled down. I loaded everything I owned into my Ford F-250, purchased with some of the proceeds from the sale of my house, and left Vancouver for good. I haven't been back since. For the next 2 years, I traveled virtually across Canada. If I found a place I liked, I would find a cheap place to live, and then find a job in the computer industry. Usually it was retail sales and repair. My credentials were never questioned. I carried certificates with me, probably the most valuable things I owned. I would work for a few weeks or months and then leave. I eventually ended up in Nova Scotia. After exploring the province, which really isn't that big if you think about it, I ended up in a small town that is practically a suburb of Halifax. It was there that I met my future partner and his wife. I had found a job at a large computer store, and he came there asking me to set up internet access for a campground. Since I was the most qualified of all the employees to discuss the subject, we ended up talking over a cup of coffee. He came back several more times to hear me out. I finally told him that to avoid driving to Halifax every time he had a question, why not just call me at home since I lived that way, or I could meet him on weekends at the campground that was giving him so much trouble. In the weeks that followed, I visited the campground several times. They had spent quite a bit of money upgrading it so that it could operate year-round. Apparently, the winter camping market was quite large and there were not many sites available. Since I was helping so much with the campground, Gordon and Heather offered to partner with me. They were trying to raise enough money to complete the modernization project. I had the funds to invest, so I did. In return, I got a partnership and the use of a shack attached to the property. Of course, I paid for all the utilities and improvements, but it was still a pretty cheap life. Once I got a foothold in the market, I found that I could make more of a living as a consultant than just a salesman in a large store. It was around this time that computer viruses and their many brethren became all too common. I decided to learn everything I could about the security aspects of computers by taking online courses and night classes at the local college. Within a couple years, I had already become a leading internet security expert, at least in my small part of the planet. My consulting business was small enough that I could handle everything myself. I had a small but loyal client base that I took very good care of. Around this time, I was approached by a college with an offer to teach evening classes for adults who wanted to learn about computers, basic email, internet surfing, and the like. The fee would be low. The classes would only take about 3 hours a week, and I could teach most of the material on the fly. I agreed and found that I was enjoying teaching in the computer industry again. One day I talked to the dean over coffee and suggested that we create a formal training program with qualified teachers or instructors. If the program was started, he promised that I would be accepted and would not need a teaching certificate or a master's degree. Eventually, they started a program based on Microsoft Windows products. There were several different programs and certifications. I taught computer networking and security. I found my niche. In the years since I'd come to Halifax, I hadn't had a serious relationship, nor did I want one. After what happened to my marriage, and after Bev just walked away, to say I was timid would be a severe understatement. Sure, I had a few short-term relationships, but I think my partners felt they were going nowhere and most left after a while. I couldn't and wouldn't blame them. While I was traveling and settling in Nova Scotia, things were moving fast in Vancouver. Pat, my former ADA, happened to run into a very pregnant Bev in a department store shortly after my divorce was finalized and a couple months after I left Vancouver. She told her about leaving and basically destroyed me. Bev was pregnant with twins when she left me. I never found out. What happened next I found out many years later. Apparently someone saw me having lunch with a beautiful woman one day and decided we were too friendly. Whoever it was reported it to Bev, who, instead of asking or talking to me about it, came to the natural and wrong conclusion. My long days at work and short nights at home during that week led her to believe I was having an affair. My former ADA convinced Bev to come back to the office with her so she could check out the dates and lunches I was making. Pat kept records of everything from the day she was hired. They were able to pinpoint the exact lunch in question. It turned out that this beautiful woman was the head of marketing. Yes, she was very beautiful and very married. We had a good working relationship, nothing more. What was reported to Bev was a misunderstanding and a mistake. If Bev had wanted to, a meeting could have been arranged as this woman was still head of marketing and could have confirmed what was reported to Bev. When Bev realized what had happened, she must have lost her mind, and they almost called an ambulance to send her to the hospital. But before they did, she gathered her courage to thank my ex-dad and give me her contact information in case I ever contacted her or anyone from the company. Of course, I never did get in touch. She then contacted my attorney, who was unable to provide her with any other information other than a large amount of money on deposit at a local bank in her name. He also provided this information to her attorney. Apparently, he did not contact her. Unfortunately for everyone, the address listed on the account turned out to be a law office. I practically disappeared. In the months that followed, Jessica and James were born. Bev kept trying to find me, but to no avail, because the internet was brand new and she didn't have the knowledge or resources to use it. Plus, she had no idea where to start looking. Now she was a single mom with twins and a missing father who knew nothing about them. With the money I left her and her job as a nurse, she was able to provide a good home and education for the children. Eventually, she gave up trying to find me, resigned to the fact that I had disappeared from her life. Jessica, growing up, was no longer so sure that I couldn't be found once she and her brother were told about their father. She and James had grown up with the internet and knew exactly what could be done. Over the course of a few weeks, she initiated a wide web search that eventually found my square peg in a round hole. How she found me, I don't know and will never know, but knowing how the internet works and what resources are available, I can guess how she did it. Of course, they didn't know for sure that their search was right, and it would be some time before they had a chance to verify it. They never told Mom that their search was probably successful, because they didn't want to get her hopes up. She accepted the fact that I had disappeared and hadn't discussed the situation with her children in years. As it turned out, it was urgent to find me. James had developed a disease that could only be cured by an organ transplant, preferably from a male relative, i.e. me. Jessica was sure she had found me living and working near Halifax. She was disappointed to find that there were no pictures of me online, which may have been the deciding factor for her. She and James arranged to fly to Halifax and track me down. They explained to Bev that they wanted to visit the East Coast because they had never been there. On that fateful Friday, they were about an hour late for college, but the helpful clerk told them that I stopped at the pub for dinner on Fridays and gave them directions to get there. I still didn't realize I had become a father, and was blissfully oblivious to the fact that these two were just beginning to confirm that I was their father. The next morning I got a call from Jessica. "Mr. Ames, I'm very sorry to have bothered you. My name is, as I said yesterday, Jessica Ames. I'm pretty sure you're my father. Look, Ms. Ames, I've been divorced for over 20 years. I don't know where my ex-wife is now, and I do know that while we were married we didn't have any children. I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm the Ames you're looking for. Look, Mr. Ames, I don't mean to be a pest, but I think I can prove that you're our father. Is there somewhere we can meet? I have some documents and photos I'd like to show you. If after that you still think we're not related, we'll leave." I thought for a few seconds. Okay, I guess I can listen to what you have to say. Where are you right now? We're at the Bayview in Halifax. She called a mid-range hotel near downtown Halifax. Okay, do you have my address? No, not really. All the GPS shows is camping. That's right. I live in the house attached to this campground. Just come and go to the main office. I'll call and tell them you're coming. They'll give you directions to the house and the gate code. Mr. Ames, I promise. I think this will be worth your attention. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I think it will take us a while, we don't know the area. I'll wait here. It's not that far away. Thank you so much. You have no idea what that means. I'll see you in a little while." She ended the conversation, and I called the campground office to let them know I was expecting guests, probably in half an hour or so, and to give them the access code to the gate of the house. I decided to use the time I had to shower and clean up. Since it was Saturday, unless I had something to do, I was in the habit of just lying around in my sweatshirt, reading or watching TV. I was sitting on the veranda sipping coffee when a rental car pulled up in front of the house. I waved to the young couple and told them they could come up the outside stairs to join me, which they quickly did. Jessica was dressed in a shirt and jeans with comfortable sabots. James slowly followed her as she walked up the stairs dressed in a t-shirt and jeans. I mistook his slowness for a lack of interest, but it was actually due to the fact that he was very sick. "Mr. Ames, it's good to see you again. Thank you for having us. I know this is an intrusion." She was clearly the spokesperson for the two of them. "Well, since you said I wouldn't regret it, how can I refuse? Can I offer you some coffee or something?" "Of course, coffee will come in handy. James takes it black, and I add a little bleach or cream, depending on what you have. I went and poured 2 more mugs of coffee and brought them on a tray along with cookies and bleach. As soon as they sipped their coffee, I got straight to the point. So, you say you have documents and photographs. What do you have that brought you to Halifax? Jessica opened her briefcase, which contained several folders of documents. The first documents were birth certificates, listing the mother as Beverly Sharon Ames and the father as John Charles Ames. So far the names were correct, but I didn't believe it until they pulled out a picture of young Bev standing next to me at our wedding reception. For as long as I can remember, my mom has had the original of this picture on her shelf along with other photos. That's you and her, isn't it? You look the same, older, with less hair, but the same. Where did you get that picture? I was only half listening to her. So far, I'd left all those horrible memories far behind me. Like I said, our mom keeps the original on a shelf with other photos. I scanned it so I could take a copy with me. She pulled a few more photos out of the folder and placed them on the table in front of me. Most of these are of us growing up, graduating from high school and such. There are a few pictures of the 3 of us. Mom was always involved in whatever we were doing. I was stunned. These 2 were actually my children. I had known nothing about them until that moment. Tears came to my eyes as I asked, "How come I didn't know about you 2? Your mother was not pregnant when I last saw her many years ago." "Well, Mr. Ames, I mean Daddy, I mean Father. May we call you Dad?" As if in a haze, I nodded in agreement. "Mom was expecting a surprise when she left you. I can tell you a little bit about it, but not too much since most of it happened before we were born." Jessica continued, recounting what she knew about the events that had happened after I left Vancouver. "So your mother never married?" "No, she never had boyfriends. She was so depressed about what she did that it took her a long time to come to terms with it. We were too young to appreciate it at the time, but she spent a lot of time in therapy learning to live with her mistake." My voice couldn't hide the bitterness. "Yes, she left without leaving a note or anything. To this day I don't know why she did that. It took me a long time to come to terms with it. I'm not sure I'll ever want to go back to the memories of what used to be. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive her for that." I took a deep breath. "You didn't tell me why you were looking for me. Not that you needed me, you grew up without a father, and you seem to be doing okay. It's not about her or us, it's about James. She doesn't know we're here, or at least that we came looking for you. She thinks the 2 of us are just here on vacation. James has a disease that will kill him if he doesn't get a transplant. The main thing is that it has to be from a male family member. And that's me? Yes. I know we have no right to ask you to do this, but it's James' only hope." "James, you didn't say anything. Does she usually speak for you?" "Yeah, ever since we both learned to talk, she hasn't stopped." He chuckled slightly. "I know, as Jess says, that we have no right to ask, but you are my last hope. No other treatments are working, and we've tried everything, because until recently we didn't know who or where our father was. So what is it with you 2? And why just you and not both of you if you're twins?" "Quite a fair question," he replied. "Apparently it's something that only men can develop, or at least predominantly men. The word is actually 10 syllables long, but basically what it boils down to is that I need a liver transplant because my liver is failing and it has to be from a male family member. So Jessica managed to track you down. It took quite a while. No one expected you to end up on the East Coast, not even the woman who used to work for you, the deputy sheriff." "You mean Patricia?" "Yes, that's right. Her name is Pat. Anyway, she told us that you never got in touch with her, even though you promised to do so. It seems she even called the lawyer you used, and even he didn't know where you were. I don't need to explain, but after what happened, I just wanted to put that life and everything that happened behind me. And I was quite successful at that until you 2 showed up yesterday. I still couldn't get my head around the fact that I had been and still was a father all this time. So after all these years of being out of my life, you just showed up hoping I'd donate an organ? Sorry, that's a bit harsh, but look at it from my point of view. Until a few minutes ago, I didn't know you existed. Yes, I mean we are grateful for that. It's a big ask. Mom doesn't know why we came here. She doesn't know we found you. Okay, as a working hypothesis, if, and I mean a big if, I agree to this, where should the transplant take place? And what makes you think I'd even qualify? I've never been tested or treated for it. So, first things first. We're working with St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. If that happens, and we do understand your reluctance, we hope that's where it will be. I interrupted. No way, not in Vancouver. I'm never going back there again, and you can take that to the bank. We thought you might say that, so we asked them to contact the hospital in Halifax. In terms of examination and treatment, as you are a male relative, the only thing that will be required is for them to confirm this and make sure your liver is functioning normally. Then all you need to do is arrange times and dates to visit the hospital. Jessica had thought of everything except one thing. I had not yet agreed to such drastic measures. At my age, it's not customary to give up part of a liver or any other organ just because we've been asked to. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Of course, my thoughts were wandering in 100 different directions. I wasn't sure if James and Jessica knew exactly what they were asking, or what implications it might have for my future well-being. I broke the silence. Look, this is too much to digest all at once. I need time to think it over. Of course we understand, Dad. It's unexpected, and it's a big, huge favor to ask of someone we've just met and who doesn't know us. We'll leave you to deal with it. We'll be at the Bayview for a couple more days. Maybe do some sightseeing, since Mom thinks that's why we're here. She took their birth certificates and a few other documents, but left the photos. Bev was and still is a beautiful woman. She had aged well, better than I had. I assured James and Jessica that I would contact them in the next day or so. I needed to discuss this with someone I trusted and whose judgment wouldn't be tainted by emotion. I found myself back at my favorite pub. Gail was working, as was another server, but there weren't many people. Jack, are you here on Saturday? Are you okay? She joked. Well, sort of, I replied in a subdued tone. Gail, I need to talk to someone I can trust. When's your break? You're not okay, are you? Why me? She asked. Because I can trust you to be objective. You are a person who knows how to work with people. I need someone I trust to listen to me and tell me how to deal with this. Okay, Jack. I'll let the boss know I'm leaving early for my break. Why don't you sit in that booth over there? She pointed to a quiet booth in the far corner, where we won't be interrupted. Now I was getting curious and anxious. Oh, you have nothing to worry about, honestly. I just want your opinion. Okay, go sit down. I'll be right there. She walked into the office to inform her boss of the change in her plans. Gail is one of the few people I really trust. Her husband is in the Navy, but she's made it clear to anyone who's tried to do anything that she's a single woman. She wouldn't fool around with her husband during his extended deployments. That was one of the reasons I valued her opinion. I had a respect for her that I had for very few people. She joined me in the booth, bringing coffee instead of the usual beer. I told the story as I knew it at the time, including the fact that Bev didn't know the real reason the kids had come here. That's all. I just want to get your opinion on donation. I'm torn between no because I don't know them from a hole in the wall, and yes because he's my flesh and blood. I just don't know, Gail, I just don't know. Well, I don't know that I can give you a completely objective opinion. Simply put, I take you as a friend. In all the years you've been coming here, you've never once hit on me or tried to pick me up or anything like that. You're one of the few people who treats me like a real person. But if you look at it from your son's point of view, I can see why they're here. You're his last hope for a normal life. So you think I should agree? I didn't say that, I just think they're out of options. So it's me, or the machine, or even death, is that what you mean? That's right. I think you should spend a few days with them before making a decision. Take in the sights, show them around like they're just visitors to the city, which they are. This will give you a chance to get to know them better and figure out if it's even worth it. The worst thing that can happen is that you'll see parts of the city again that you may not have seen in a long time. Gosh, I'm glad I came and talked to you. I hadn't thought about it at all, and they mentioned doing some sightseeing. Thanks, Gail, you're a true friend. You're welcome, Jack. Glad to have been of help. Now it's time for me to get back to work. Oh no, I'm sorry. I chatted through your entire lunch hour. Not really. I usually just drink coffee and don't get up. I eat when I get home. Jack, I'm glad I could help, I really am. Now go sightseeing. I'll call them in the morning. Thanks, Gail. Good night. I walked out of the pub feeling better than I had in hours. As Gail had said, if nothing changes, I'll visit my town again. I called the hotel early the next morning, hoping that Jessica and James had not yet left for their adventure. I offered to show them various sights and maybe visit a few places that most tourists don't see. I called my boss at home, telling him we had a family emergency. He said he would find a substitute for a few days. Well, maybe it will only be a few days now, or maybe more. I will find out within those few days. It was fun to be a tour guide. I had forgotten, or at least taken for granted, how much the city has to offer its guests. For 3 days we were on the move almost from dawn to dusk. I found that James tires easily, and our pace was more or less dictated by his ability to keep up. I know that in some places he was glad that he was provided with a wheelchair so that Jessica or I could push him. I found myself feeling very warmly toward these two young, sincere people. There was no contrived austerity or pretentiousness about them, just two young, cheerful, sincere people who were happy to have me as a guide to this wonderful city. Despite my initial misgivings, I found that I really enjoyed being with them and showing them the sights. They frankly admitted that they knew next to nothing about the east coast of Canada, other than the little information they had been given in history and geography classes. True to my word, I took them to places the average tourist would never see and avoided the worst tourist traps. Finally, it had to end. Their time was up and I had to go back to classes for another month. Even before the last day, I had decided that if I qualified, I would become a donor for James. However, I didn't tell them about it until our last dinner together. When I made my surprise announcement, they were stunned into silence. They really didn't expect me to make a decision so soon. Okay. Here's how things stand. I'm quite willing to be a donor for James if all the tests are in order and the powers that be, whoever they are, decide it can be done. However, there are a couple of conditions. Agreed? I am willing to be a donor, but only on my terms. They nodded and I continued. First of all, this only affects the three of us, no one else, including your mother. She doesn't need to know where I am or what I'm doing. You may have to tell her I'm a donor, but that's all she needs to know. Second, it has to happen in early July. That will give me most of the summer to recover. I have no idea of the timeline, so you will have to contact the clinic to be informed. Third, the first two conditions are non-negotiable. This is between the three of us and the hospital. No one, and I really mean no one, else. Do we understand each other? 7 kinds of emotions were reflected on their faces before Jessica came to my side of the table and hugged me tightly. James reached out and took my hand in both of his. For a few minutes they were too stunned to speak. Finally Jessica said, "You know how to make an evening unforgettable. We can't even thank you enough. We know you've given this a lot of thought, so I won't ask if you really mean it. As for the rest, well, we'll figure it out. I'll call the clinic in Vancouver tomorrow so they can get started here. Can I give them your work number as well as your home number?" "Of course, and I'll make sure you have my cell phone. They can always reach me on it." We had dinner and, since they had an early flight, settled in for the night. I was both happy and sad that they were leaving, but knew I would be in frequent contact with them over the next few weeks. If all goes according to plan, I will see them again in early July, about 6 weeks from now. I returned to my house and began preparing for class the next day. My students would be taking their certification exams in the coming weeks, and I was sure there would be a lot of last-minute questions. At noon the next day, I was just about to start my lunch break when my cell phone rang with an incoming call. It was the Transplant clinic. Would I be available for an initial checkup on Friday? I scheduled a time and arranged for a substitute instructor to take my class for a couple hours. Other than taking a long time, as if rushed and waiting, the first tests didn't produce much, basically taking numerous vials of blood and peeing in a bottle. If they were good, the next batch would be more thorough. I was able to arrange that all further tests would be done late at night so as not to disturb my students. I was also able to emphasize to the nurse, very young, very pretty and very officious, that my students had priority, especially since the end of the year was approaching. Over the next few weeks, I donated more blood than a vampire, peed in more bottles than I knew existed, and went on more interviews than I thought necessary. Eventually I was deemed suitable, and now the hospital was going to schedule the surgery. As I told Jessica and James, it had to be early July so that I would have all summer to recover. All this time I received constant phone calls, text messages, and emails from James and Jessica keeping me updated on what was happening on the West Coast. I was finally informed that the surgeries, since both James and I were due at the same time, were scheduled for the 4th of July. They arranged for his surgeon to fly to Halifax to perform the transplant surgery. The next thing to consider was placement. James would be in the hospital for at least a month, possibly more, and I would be in the hospital for up to a month, depending on how well and quickly I recovered. I decided to offer my home to Jessica, as she would be coming in daily to support James and, for that matter, me after the surgery. She readily agreed, stating that she didn't want to live in a hotel for so long at all, especially during the height of tourist season. I had a room, so why not? They arrived late in the evening of July 2nd and were on their way to the hospital early the next morning. It was with some trepidation that I entered the hospital in the early evening. James and Jessica were already there waiting for me as his preparations took longer. They had told me they would be there early in the evening, so I showed up early in the evening. They must have an express lane for organ donors, because once I told the emergency room why I was here, they couldn't do anything for me. I had my own personal attendant who took me to my room where she sat with me until one of the nurses came in and told me that they, meaning the medical staff, would take it from there. I was not allowed to eat or drink anything, but was allowed to suck on ice cubes to dry my throat. Eventually I fell into a restless sleep. The nurse woke me up at an ungodly hour to prepare me for surgery, then the gas man came in to tell me what to expect. The last person I saw before surgery was the surgeon himself. He again explained exactly what was going to happen and asked if I had any questions. When I asked why it always happens at the crack of dawn, he and the nurses laughed, and I relaxed a little. I was going to be okay. I have no idea how long it was when I regained consciousness. My side hurt terribly, and my throat felt dry and raw. It took a few moments to realize where I was and why I was here. The nurse must have been sitting with me, or very near me, because she appeared almost as soon as I woke up. "Mr. Ames, welcome back. The surgery went well and you are both recovering. James hasn't woken up yet. Can I get you anything?" I'm paraphrasing since I have no idea what exactly she said, only the "it went well" part has stuck in my mind. I must have fallen asleep again. The next time I woke up, it was already dark. The same nurse must have been waiting for me to regain consciousness, because she appeared as soon as I opened my eyes. Now I realized why my throat felt dry and raw. I had a tube sticking out of it. It made it hard to speak, so my answers were limited to nods and shakes of the head. She made a few notes on the ubiquitous chart, adjusted something in the 4 on my arm, and I fell asleep again. When I next woke up, it was still dark, but the damn tube had already been removed from my throat. Another nurse was there now, and she said similar words. "Welcome back," etc. I managed to talk her into giving me a sip of cold water. My sore throat felt like heaven. Of course, my side and back hurt where I had a piece of my liver removed. I was just beginning to realize exactly why I was in the hospital. The nurse assured me that rest was the best thing for my recovery. The surgeon would come in the morning to examine me, and the staff would be happy to give me any help I needed. It would be several hours before I knew exactly what I would need. I haven't had any experience with beds and things like that, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. It was the 4th day after surgery when Jessica came to see me. She had come before quite a few times, but I wasn't aware enough to realize it. She again expressed her and James' gratitude for donating part of my liver. In the days that followed, we talked about many mundane things. She gave my house a thorough cleaning, a kind of therapy to take my mind off what was happening in the hospital. She met with my partners and told them what was going on and why she was in the house. In all the commotion, I didn't mention it for the simple reason that I hadn't seen them in what seemed like months. They would be sure to come visit me before I was sent home. I could tell Jessica was hiding something, but I was in no state to insist on it. Whatever it was, there was nothing I could do about it. In the early stages of my recovery, they allowed me to see James. They assured me that the transplant had been successful and that he was recovering well. However, he would have to spend quite a bit of time in the ICU. 2 days later, I was moved to a semi-private room. I wondered if James would be moved into the room with me. It would be convenient for us and for visitors. Early one morning, I woke up from one of my many dreams and felt someone sitting next to my bed. The room was quite dark, but I realized it was a she, even though I couldn't make out any facial features. Whoever it was didn't immediately realize I was awake until I stirred and reached for my water. "Hey, Jack," Bev said. "My name is Beverly Sharon Ames, and this is the story of how one stupid immature moment caused me to completely screw up my life and essentially ruin the life of a good, innocent man. Jack and I met in high school and were practically inseparable from the start. We dated in university, although we never lived together, and got married right after graduation. I was a nurse and took a job as an operating room nurse at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. Jack had a job waiting for him at a large software company near the center of the city. We had a good life. We made love when we wanted to, there was no schedule or date. We were both paid well and were able to buy a small house on a nice lot in the trendy West End neighborhood of Vancouver. There were and are many young professionals living in this neighborhood. We did all the usual things that young couples do and had a very active social life. Both of our parents died within a few months of each other, and this allowed us to be debt-free except for the mortgage on the house. We always seemed to be on the go, and we enjoyed living that kind of life. One day I was having lunch in the cafeteria with some nurses, and one of them mentioned that she had seen my husband, Jack, having lunch with a very attractive woman, and they seemed to be on more than friendly terms. I didn't think much of it at the time. Jack was always having lunch with clients or even members of his team. The following weekend was nothing special until Jack was called into work to help his team troubleshoot a problem they had been working on all weekend. As a supervisor, he was usually only called in for the weekend in case of an emergency. I didn't see him until late Sunday night, and when I got up on Monday, he had already left for work. For the rest of the week I hardly saw him. He would leave before me in the morning, and he would usually come home late, much later than usual, have a snack and fall into bed, and so it went on all week. Because of this, I somehow remembered the conversation from the previous week and came to the conclusion that he wasn't working, but was having an affair. Stupid and immature, I know. When the situation repeated itself, by Wednesday evening I was sure of it. On Thursday, I took an indefinite leave of absence that was to start the next day. Sure enough, on Friday he was gone before I even got up, as he had been all week. Shortly after he left for work, I packed my car with everything I owned or thought I owned. As luck would have it, I found a fully furnished apartment in the neighboring town of Burnaby. Transportation was available to get to work as it ran right past the front door of the apartment building. The last time I left the house, I didn't even leave Jack a note to let him know I was pregnant, and he was going to be the father of twins, or why I was leaving. I moved into my apartment and found a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases. After some discussion, we decided that the cause would be irreconcilable differences rather than adultery, since I had no evidence to support that. I also asked him to stipulate that my whereabouts and contact information not be shared with Jack or his attorney. My attorney received the signed documents back about 2 weeks later. Attached was a note from Jack asking why I left. I never responded. Looking back, which is always 20/20, I wish I had, or better yet, that he had contested the divorce. After about 2 months, I went back to work. I was able to work until about the 8th month of pregnancy, and everything was going well. Aside from a huge hole in my heart, I was doing well. It was probably about 3 months into the divorce when I met his assistant, Pat. Of course, she pounced on me asking why I had ruined a good man's life and left him without a word. I'm afraid I wasn't very nice to her, as I considered myself the guilty party at the time. She strongly defended Jack and even persuaded me to accompany her to her office so that I could see for myself Jack's complete innocence. Pat was able to show me, since she had all his calendars from all his years of employment, that the woman in question was the head of marketing for the company, and if I needed confirmation that this was a business, she, Pat, would arrange a meeting. Everyone knew that Jack had a good working relationship with the heads of the various departments. All he did was have lunch with a colleague. I'm afraid I lost my head at that moment. Of course I was ashamed, but even worse, I realized only now how wrong I had been in doubting my husband's love, Jack's love. I realized how wrong I had been in doubting my husband's love, in doubting Jack's love. I was almost hysterical. I managed to calm down enough to thank Pat, told her that no one had heard from Jack since he quit, and left her my contact information in case they ever heard from him. I went back to my apartment and burst into tears until I passed out. I ended up sleeping for probably about 10 hours. I called the lawyer Jack had used in the divorce and made an appointment with him. He provided me with information about the bank account Jack had set up for me, as well as the report on the sale of the house. The attorney had no idea where Jack had gone and had not heard from him since the sale of the house. Jack had disappeared. Everything I tried turned out to be nothing. No one we talked to had heard from him or from him since the divorce or since he left. I was left alone with 2 kids due in a couple months, and it was no one's fault but mine. After the children were born, I went back to work. Thanks to the money Jack left for me, we lived better than most single-parent families. Jessica and James grew up to be fun-loving, intelligent young people. They always did well in school, and no parent felt more proud when they walked across the stage to graduate from high school. Both received academic scholarships to attend university. Just then, James fell ill. When he finally got to see a specialist, the news was not good. He needed a liver transplant from a male donor who was also a family member. The only option I could think of was Jack, and no one knew where he was. I didn't know that the children had managed to find their father using the internet. I rarely used the computer, used to making do with the old ways like the telephone and actual letter writing, as the kids call it. After graduation, they informed me that they were going to take a vacation and fly to the East Coast since they had never seen it. Although I was somewhat surprised at their choice, I believed them and they made the arrangements. They flew out around the middle of May. They returned about 10 days later. I could tell by their behavior that something was going on, but I couldn't fully figure out what. There were a lot of quiet phone calls, late-night emails, and the like. I could only assume it had something to do with James' illness. That they were actually texting Jack didn't occur to me. Stupid, I know, but I didn't realize the power of the internet and how well my kids had adapted to it. Finally, the day came when they had to fly back to Halifax. And that's when Jessica broke down and told me all about why they had traveled to the East Coast, how they had found and met Jack, and how he had agreed to donate some of his liver to James. That explained all the secret phone calls and emails. I was very angry with both of them for staying away from me until they informed me of the terms of the transfer. I was not to be informed of his whereabouts, at least. One evening, Jessica and James sat down at the table and discussed everything in detail. They decided that since he was going east for a major operation, I should be informed, even though one of the main conditions of Jack's consent to the transplant had been violated. They vowed to keep the betrayal from him. The next morning they flew out to the East Coast. I was torn in 10 different directions. Should I leave it at that, since we were both getting on with our lives? Should I fly back? What would I tell Jack? Could I expect him to forgive me after all these years? Did I even deserve to be forgiven? I thought and thought about it for 2 days, and then I decided that I would take a vacation and fly to Halifax, but I wouldn't tell Jessica or James until I got there. I'll call Jessica on her cell phone from the Halifax airport. I arrived in Halifax on the same flight as the children, only 5 days later. James had had surgery and his condition was getting better every day. Jessica hadn't mentioned Jack. I called Jessica as soon as I got off the plane while I was waiting for my luggage. It was the height of tourist season and I hadn't even booked a hotel room. I hoped that I could stay at Jessica's house for at least a few days. Jessica was a little upset when I called. It turned out that she had been staying at Jack's house while he was in the hospital. Now I didn't know what to do. Jessica came and picked me up after all. We talked about it on the way to Halifax and decided to go straight to the hospital. Housing could be sorted out later. We visited James first. He looked quite healthy and said he was feeling much better, weak, but better. He made a few jokes about his condition and I realized he was on the mend. He was hoping to be transferred out of the ICU in a couple days. I didn't want to leave, but Jessica dragged me to Jack's room before she went back to talk to James. The room was a double, but the second bed was empty. I looked at the man I had hurt. He was just as I remembered him, though his hair had fallen out and he had turned gray. Otherwise, he was almost exactly as I remembered him, and exactly the man I had loved and offended. He woke up, stirred, and reached for a glass of water. I said, "Hi, Jack." It wasn't until a few moments later that I realized it was Bev standing there. What is she doing here? How do? Yes, you know? Jessica and James would have to explain themselves. I had no desire to communicate with Bev, or to talk to her at all. I pressed the call button for the nurse, who entered the room almost immediately. "Mr. Ames, are you all right? Do you need anything?" "Yes," I wheezed. "Get her out of here. I don't want any visitors." The nurse escorted Bev out before she could say anything else. That part of my life was over, and I had no desire to visit again. Not long after James' visit, Jessica came into the room. "Dad, I'm so sorry. We told her before we flew out here, but we didn't know she was going to leave too. I only found out about it when she called me from the airport. What does the phrase 'between the three of us' mean to you? You and James gave me your word. I don't think you can be trusted." I managed to keep my mouth shut. "Dad, I was hoping you wouldn't think that." "Yeah, we should have told her. She would have guessed anyway. She's a nurse in the operating room, for heaven's sake. Honestly, I didn't think she'd fly here. Can we talk about this later? We have to find a place for her to stay." In a squeaky voice I said, "If I was feeling better, you'd both be watching. I am very, very angry and disappointed in you. When you give your word, it has to mean something. It builds trust. If you break your word, you break trust. It will be very hard for you to live if you cannot keep your word. Now get out of here. I don't want to talk to you." I turned away so she wouldn't see the pain in my eyes. She left the room, crying quietly. Eventually I fell asleep again. As the doctor said, rest is the best medicine. It was easy for me to get my body to rest. I was too sore to move much, but not so easy for my mind. I was very angry with those two kids, well, I guess young adults. But as upset as I was, I felt like someday I needed to hear from Bev why she left me without a word. I needed to think about it for a while. I was too tired and upset to think rationally. At Jessica's suggestion and Gordon and Heather's insistence after Jessica asked them to, Bev moved into the third bedroom in Jack's house. She didn't have many options available to her. There was almost nothing in the room except a bed and a nightstand. Apparently it was used mostly for storage. Heather arrived shortly after Bev and Jessica came home from the hospital. She knew about Jessica and James, but knew nothing about Bev or even who she was. After getting to know Bev, Heather realized that the situation was going to be awkward to say the least. She knew, of course, that Jack was divorced, but he had never discussed the matter. She knew that he seemed content to live on his own and lead a quiet, carefree life. Over a cup of coffee, the three women discussed what needed to be done. It wouldn't be fair to ask Bev to move out, and the likelihood of her finding a place to stay for more than a night or two was slim. After much discussion about the various alternatives, they decided that Bev would stay here, at least for the time being, and Jack wouldn't be told anything. If she was still here when he was discharged from the hospital, they would settle the matter then. The next day, Jessica and Bev went to visit James. They didn't want to risk upsetting Jack further, so they didn't go to his room or even inform him of their visit. They were still with James when Gordon and Heather came to visit Jack. The next day, my partner and his wife came to visit. They were busy working at the campground. It was that time of year, and it was almost full every night. Gordon said the usual platitudes and hoped I would get better. Heather, on the other hand, said she wanted to talk it out. She'd met and chatted with Jessica and Bev yesterday. "Jack, I know it's not for me, or Gordon, or us to tell you how to live your life. But I have to say this. You really should talk to those two women. I think Jessica's more upset about not keeping her word than she is about you. After she got out of the hospital yesterday, she felt very unhappy. Yes, she broke her word, but in a way you have to look at it from her point of view. They came here for her brother to have major surgery. Bev is a nurse, there's no way in hell they could have kept it from her. They managed to keep the secret as long as they did." "Yeah," I muttered. "Where I come from, your word means everything. If they wanted to tell their mother, why didn't they ask me first? I cannot answer that question. All I can say is that they are both extremely grateful for your sacrifice, and yes, that is exactly right. I, myself and Gordon, don't know the history with your ex, you never mentioned her, and we didn't feel it necessary to ask. My point is, since she's here, maybe you should sit down and talk to her once you get out of here and feel better. She said she's going to be here for a few weeks until James is back on his feet. And what exactly is that going to do, other than pull out memories that are better forgotten?" I wasn't going to let her go that easily. I have my own life here, a good life. I'm quite content with the way I live. All these memories will only bring back pain and betrayal. And I don't need that. Heather was more perceptive than I gave her credit for. "Yes, you're content, but you're not happy. It's a huge difference. You're teaching, you're counseling, and then you come home to a huge empty house. You may be content, but that's all you are, and you're content in your own right. Yes, you're right. But if you want to argue about it, you're going to lose. I'm on my own, of my own free will. After what Bev did to me, I made a pact with myself that I would never, ever allow myself to be put in a position where something like that could happen again. I made that pact with myself over 20 years ago, and I haven't seen a single thing that would make me change my mind, nothing." My voice was getting tired quickly, as was my own. It was taking more energy than I could give. "Look, I appreciate what you're saying. We'll agree to disagree on this. But I'm really tired and I'm losing my voice. Can we do this another day?" "Of course, Jack. I'm sorry to lecture you. I get a little carried away sometimes." She kissed me lightly on the cheek and walked away, Gordon following her, patting me on the shoulder and smirking slightly. He didn't need to say anything. He could sense what I was thinking. Over the next few days, the surgeon who had operated on me visited me more and more often. I should have been getting stronger, but I wasn't. The doctor who performed the transplant returned to BC once he was sure James was on the mend. I didn't realize it at the time, but I developed a post-operative infection and a fever. Antibiotics were having little effect, and it looked like I was going to have to be reopened. The decision was made when I passed out in the middle of the night. Probably all the machines I was connected to started beeping and giving some kind of alarm. I didn't wake up until 2 days later and was back in the ICU. I had a nurse in the room with me who was monitoring everything, taking my temperature, blood pressure, and everything else. She saw that I was kind of awake. "Mr. Ames, welcome back. We were very worried about you. I'll let the surgeon know you're back with us. Be right back." She quickly left the room, only to reappear a few minutes later. "Okay, we've informed the surgeon. He's in the operating room right now, but he'll come in as soon as he's done. In the meantime, you rest. You'll have someone with you at all times until we're told otherwise." I only nodded my head slightly. With a tube down my throat and wires everywhere, I couldn't do anything else. When I woke up some time later, the surgeon was in the room quietly discussing me with the nurse. They noticed that I was conscious again. "Mr. Ames, I'm Dr. Hartley. You gave us quite a scare. You developed a post-operative infection after your first surgery when you donated part of your liver. We tried to fight it with antibiotics alone, but they didn't work. I had to operate again to find the source of the infection. You had an abscess. We don't know exactly why, but it happens. You are on very strong antibiotics and will be for some time. Your fever has gone down a little bit, but we will monitor you here in the ICU for a few days. Continue to rest. It's the best medicine we can give you. I'll check in on you every day. In the meantime, the staff will take care of you. He made a few notes on my chart and left the room. The nurse came over, fluffed my pillow and asked if I was comfortable. Honestly, I didn't know. I was aching all over. Luckily, I fell back asleep. The next time I woke up, Jessica was sitting next to my bed reading a novel. As soon as she noticed I was awake, she left to tell the nurses and came back. Dad? We were so scared. Me and James, don't want to lose you again. She seemed to be crying, or at least she was. As soon as the nurse comes, I'll go and let James know. He's very worried. He's getting better and may be discharged in a few weeks. He's lying in the same room as you until he's operated on. I could only nod my head slightly. The damn tube was still in my throat. It was sore and raw before, and now it was even worse. The nurse came in to check my vitals. Kind of unnecessary since the machines were doing it, but apparently they need a human to do it at least occasionally. She made a note in the chart and said that as soon as Dr. Hartley was available, the tube would be removed from my throat. It looked like I was well enough to breathe on my own again. Jessica relieved the staff by agreeing to sit with me. The nurses weren't too far away and checked on everything frequently. I fell asleep again. I had a strange dream. Someone was talking to me, telling me about their life. I couldn't figure out who it was, but I felt like I should know this person. I was pretty sure. Rhea was a woman, but I couldn't make out any facial features. The voice was quiet and soothing. I slept on. After a while, I don't know if I woke up or just came to my senses. There was light coming into the room through the half-open blinds. I could see someone standing looking out the window, but I couldn't make out who it was. It was just a silhouette to my eyes. My whole body ached, and my throat was sore from the damn tube that was still in it. The machines around me kept beeping, beeping, beeping. The silhouette turned and walked back to my bed. Finally I could make out her features. It was Bev. Now I was confused. What was she doing here? And why am I here? And where exactly am I? These thoughts raced through my head as I tried to figure out what was going on. Gradually it all came back, the transplant, the infection. But that didn't explain Bev. She wasn't supposed to be here. As I found out later, Jessica had agreed to sit with me most of the day. Of course, she wanted to be with her brother, who was apparently on the mend. Bev agreed to sit with me late at night and really, early in the morning, usually from about 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. I reasoned that I would be fine with Jessica, but Bev would not. The reasoning was sound. A few days after I was out of the ICU and back in the semi-private room, Jessica came to visit James, who was in the room across from mine. He too was in a semi-private room, and he, like me, had no roommates at the moment. So Jessica walked in with an envelope in her hand. "Dad? Hi. How are you feeling?" She uttered the usual platitude. I was still a little angry at her and James for breaking their word, at least not by talking to me first. I had already talked to her about it, and I didn't want to bring it up again. "Hey Jess. How's James doing? He should be up soon, no?" "He's fine, Dad. He's already getting up and walking a little at a time, and you should be too." "Yes, I know. Perhaps tomorrow, if Dr. Hartley gives the okay." I was curious about the envelope, but I didn't bother to ask. I didn't even know if it was for me or about me. If it was, I would soon find out. The answer to my unasked question came almost immediately. "Dad, I know you don't want to talk about Mom. Please just hear me out. I've already told you about what happened after you left Vancouver. Of course, I don't know the whole story, because we weren't around then. Mom wrote you a letter, a long letter, explaining what happened and why. James and I ask is that you at least read it. With some trepidation, Jessica held out the envelope to me. I didn't bother opening it, there was plenty of time for that. So your mom's still here? Yes, and before you ask, she lived with me in your house. I was about ready to burst into tears at the unwanted and, in my opinion, unwarranted intrusion into my life when she quickly continued. I discussed it with your partners as you were in no condition to talk to me. Anyway, they suggested she stay at my place since you weren't home anyway. She used the little third bedroom. We all know you won't like it, and believe me, we understand, but she had nowhere else to go. As she had already guessed, I was very angry with all these people, including my partners. She could go home to Vancouver or better yet stay there, I said. I tried unsuccessfully to contain the anger in my voice. Dad, that was the plan. Once James was out of the ICU and on the mend, she was going to go back to Vancouver. And then you got an infection. Dad, every night while you were in the ICU, she sat with you, all night. I was there during the day, and she was with you every night. I know you probably don't remember, but she talked to you and basically told you everything in the letter. She begged. She was on the verge of bursting into tears. And I suppose everything should be just fine and back to normal. I don't think so. No one expects that, Dad. Mom just wants you to find out from her what happened and why. That's all there is to it. She doesn't have any expectations. That's good, because I'm not even sure if I want to read her explanation. It happened a long time ago, and I don't want to revisit the past. If anything, I'd rather it stay buried that way. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm tired. I rolled over onto my side, pulling away from her. I heard her crying as she left the room and closed the door. Dr. Hartley let me start walking, first up and down the hallway of the ward and then moving to the treadmill in the physical therapy department. I have to say, if this is what old age feels like, I want to die young. It took a few days before I was able to walk the entire length of the hallway without assistance, which was only about 100 feet. The time I spent on the treadmill was measured first in seconds and then minutes. It took weeks before I felt I was walking at a normal pace. 2 days after Jessica handed over the letter from Bev, I finally got around to reading it. I didn't want to do it at first, because I'd kind of known what it was about from my conversations with Jessica and James, but I'd never, at least not consciously, heard it from Bev herself. Bev's letter to Jack. Dear Jack. Now that I have found you, or at least Jessica and James, I feel it is my duty to tell you what happened over 20 years ago and why. That doesn't excuse my actions. I did you completely wrong. Everything that happened after I left you is my fault. I have lived with the guilt since that terrible time. Here's what I did and why. About a week before I left you, I had lunch with several fellow nurses. One of them mentioned that she had seen you having lunch with a beautiful woman and that you seemed more than friendly. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time because you always told me you were having lunch with clients or coworkers. Anyway, the following Sunday you were called into work. Your team had a problem with the code they were working on or something like that. You got home late and left the next morning before I got up. It went on like that for the rest of the week. I never saw you again. You would come home after I went to bed and leave in the morning before I woke up. By Wednesday, I remembered a conversation with another nurse. I was convinced myself, that you were having an affair. On Thursday I took emergency leave and planned to leave the house, our house, after you left for work on Friday, which I did. Jack, I was so wrong. I jumped to the conclusion that you were having an affair. Considering how many hours you were working, I didn't see you at all that week. Instead of calling your office to talk to you or waiting for you to come home, I had already decided that I was leaving you for your new lover. Jack, if it would make you happy, I was willing to completely disappear from your life. I didn't understand it, because I thought we were happy, we loved each other so much. I shouldn't have doubted that. That's why I instructed my lawyer not to reveal my whereabouts. You didn't fight the divorce. I didn't respond to the note you sent with the divorce papers because you only asked why I left, and I assumed you already knew. I don't know why, but if you had fought the divorce or I had responded to your note, my mistake could have been corrected and our lives would have turned out completely differently. I didn't want to tell you about the twins. If you weren't going to be their father, you didn't need to know about them. Jack, it just tore me up. I was bitter for a long, long time. It wasn't until I ran into your assistant Pat at the supermarket that I realized how wrong I was. She talked me into going back to your office and checking your appointment calendar. We found out that you are having lunch with the marketing manager. I will admit that she is a beautiful woman, but as I found out, she is very married and would not think of having an affair with you or anyone else. You were just having lunch with a coworker. Pat suggested I talk to her, but by this time I realized what I had done, how much I had hurt you. I still had a couple months left before the twins were born, and I did my best to find you in that time. Jack, dear Jack. I was so wrong. You disappeared, and it was completely my fault. The children had no father while they were growing up. I spent a long time healing, learning to live with the guilt. It never left me, that guilt. I just learned to accept that it would always be a part of me and tried to move on. I kept our wedding portrait on the mantel in the house where I raised the twins. Now I know Jessica made a copy and gave it to you. I have many others that depict us twins or me and the twins. Instead of having you, the man I loved completely, I only had memories. I never, ever wanted to be in a situation where I could hurt someone like that again, which is why I never got married. In fact, I've barely dated in all these years. Just like I hurt you, I hurt myself. And I have never, ever forgiven myself for what I did to you. I always hoped you'd be happy in your new life, wherever it was. You've met Jessica and James. They're two wonderful kids who managed to grow up without a father. They naturally asked about you, but I could only tell them what I'd done. Until a few days ago, I didn't know where you were. If it hadn't been for Jessica and her knowledge of computers and how to get information from the internet, I'm afraid I would have died with guilt, and you would never have known. I can't speak for the generosity you've shown, James. How can you describe giving back a chance at a normal life? You did it, Jack, not being able to watch your children grow up, to be with them at sporting events, to see them grow and develop into two wonderful young adults. You weren't there for them as they grew and matured. You weren't there for them, and it was my fault, not yours. Dear Jack. I don't expect you to forgive me, though I really hope that someday you'll at least stop hating me. You don't deserve and didn't deserve what I did to you. I want so badly to sit down and talk to you, to hear the voice I've missed so much. To tell you in person how much you mean to me. I understand if you don't want to talk to me, but I hope you do. Love. Bev. Wow, that was a great letter. Yes, she was admitting guilt, but she was also bringing back a bunch of memories that I thought were far behind me, a life that had once been a long, long time ago. It was obvious that Bev had no expectations of me one way or the other. I wasn't sure how to respond to that, or if I should at all. Jessica came by to see me later that day after I read the letter. She didn't mention it. James was already up and walking around. Since his surgery was much more intense than mine, I quickly moved to his level of recovery. He will be in the hospital for at least 3 more weeks. I will be in the hospital for a week or a week and a half. If Bev stays until James is released from the hospital, my house could be a very interesting place to live. Or not. I started exploring alternatives. I didn't think I was ready or even willing to face the situation that awaited me at the campground. Salvation, in a way, came from my partners. If I wanted to, I could stay with them until Bev and Jessica left. They had a granny suite in the basement that I could use as much as I wanted. That solved 2 problems at once: where Bev would live when I got home, and the awkward situation that would arise if she stayed in the house. They'd arranged for Jessica to bring some of my clothes. I wouldn't need much since I wouldn't be doing anything special except walking and going to physical treatments at the hospital. A week later I was discharged from the hospital. Over the next few days, I read and reread the letter many times. I also remembered the voice that I thought I had heard in my dreams or when I was unconscious. From what Jessica had told me, the voice could only have been Bev's, because she had sat with me all night, every night while I was in the ICU, and Jessica said that Bev talked to me whenever she was near me. Jessica became a frequent visitor, and my partners began to treat her like an older daughter, an addition to their existing brood. James was recovering and would soon be released from the hospital, after which they would all go back to Vancouver and I could get my house back. Jessica met with me one afternoon to inform me of the estimated due date, and then said, "Daddy, I know what you're going to say to this, but please hear me out. It's Mom. I'm worried about her. Now that she knows where you are, all the guilt she's been feeling is coming to the surface again. I told you about how she went to therapy for years just to get over it. Dad, it's tearing her apart. She doesn't expect you to forgive her, but she doesn't want you to hate her. Can't you just talk to her before we go home? Please. I don't hate her and I didn't hate her. It took me a long time to get over her, to accept that she was gone. Why would I want to remember all that again? Maybe because in your subconscious you still care about her? Years ago you would have been right. But I don't think so now. She's just someone from my distant past, someone I once knew. The fact that she's your mother has nothing to do with it, just like the fact that I'm your father. I was never your father. Dad, we all know that. It's not your fault. Mom always said. You can't undo the past, but maybe you can at least figure out if you want to start over. If anything, be a friend to her, to us. With you and Jamie, I planned on being a part of your lives anyway, since now I'm part of Jamie, or he's part of me, or whatever. But I'm not sure I want, or even need to go back to the past. I've built a good life here and I've accepted that I'm on my own, and that's my choice. I haven't seen or heard anything from anyone that would make me want to change that. Yes, but as Heather says, you're not happy. Right, and you know what? That's not a bad thing at all. I'm happy with my life. I don't need the excitement and everything else. Happiness died a long time ago, the day your mother left me without explanation. I have no hope of seeing happiness again in my life. Revisiting what was or could have been won't change it. What was or what could have been doesn't make sense, and I can't think of anything that will change the way I look at it. So you won't be seeing her, talking to her? I thought for a few seconds and then said, "Tell you what, for you and James' sake, I'll meet her for a few minutes. Don't think about anything. I'm doing this for the two of you. After that, once I'm free, I'll just get on with my life here." She thanked me profusely and literally sprinted out of the basement suite to her rental car. She would bring Bev back the next day before my scheduled trip to physical therapy. The next day after lunch they drove up to my place. The door was open, as it was a beautiful day. I only waved at them when Jessica knocked on the door frame. Bev looked almost exactly the same as when I had last seen her years ago. My heart sank at the sight of her, but it soon passed. "Hi, Jack," she greeted me. "Thanks for agreeing to meet me. It means a lot. You look good, a little older, but the same as I remember." "Hi, Bev. Come in and sit down." Jessica pretended to be about to leave, and I added, "And you, Jessica. I want you to be there for this, since you've organized everything. But Dad, stay. You may not say anything, but stay." She sat up like an obedient puppy. Bev sat next to her on the couch, and I settled into the chair. "So what did you want to see me for, Bev? To make sure I didn't hate you? Were you hoping something would happen between us?" My voice was flat, not angry or upset or anything, just flat. "Jack, I just wanted to thank you for what you did for James. And yes, I hope you don't hate me. I don't expect anything, honestly, but I hope you don't hate me anymore. Bev, I never hated you. It took me years to get over the hurt and betrayal, and I have no desire to go back to that. What I did for James was the right thing to do. I plan to continue to be a part of Jessica and James' lives, but I don't want or expect anything between us. We will be acquaintances, but nothing more than that. I have a good life here. I'm content and don't need more than what I have. I'm glad, Jack. I really am. What I did, well, you know how I feel. I wrote that letter from the bottom of my heart. You'd have a right to hate me, but I've been really hoping I didn't, ever since I found out Jessica and James found you. You say you don't hate me and you never have. I have no right to ask for more and I won't. As for the kids, we would love to have you be a part of their lives. You deserve it, at least. Visit them anytime you can. That's not going to happen, Bev. I will never set foot on the threshold of Vancouver or the Lower Mainland again. I told Jessica and James that, and I mean it. If Jessica and James want to visit me, they'll either come here or somewhere neutral. But it won't be in the Vancouver area. And that's out of the question. I understand, Jack. I think I feel the same way. But before we leave, let's do one more thing. You need to get in touch with Pat, the woman who used to be your assistant. She'd love to hear from you. She doesn't know you were found, but I suspect either Jessica or James or both of them will tell her. They rose from the couch and headed for the door. Jessica came over and hugged me, tears streaming down her face. Daddy, thank you for everything. We leave in 2 days and then you can have your house. If it's okay with James, I'll bring it over tomorrow. She walked out the door, followed by Bev, who turned to say something. Goodbye, Bev, I said and quietly closed the door behind them.